as a source. And then you have to add in all the horrific things that God does, and
somehow accept that.
Right, and you have to somehow get, and it became too much for me. I was like, this is impossible. It can't be. An all-knowing, all-powerful, all-loving being could not endorse this. This could not be. He could do better. He could do better, and so I'm left with either the Bible is not really the Word of God, or God is not all perfect, all loving, and all knowing. And so I'm like, okay, maybe the Bible is our bad job as humans. This is our bad job of trying to make sense of the divine. Mm-hmm. So maybe some of it's right, but there is a God who's up there who, he's benevolent and all that kind of stuff that I thought God should be. But he doesn't really have much to do with the Bible. That's just our job of trying to interpret it and failing miserably. Mm-hmm. And the more I thought about it, when I went at this point, because there's one not far from the University of Utah, there's like a Zen center, and I tried to do meditation for a while, and I started to read about Buddhism, because I know some people who are really into that, and I read about, actually in one of my college courses, somebody kind of talked about Islam a little bit, which in one way sort of appealed to me, because I guess one of the pillars of Islam is education or knowledge. Mm-hmm. And I was like, that's great, because knowledge is what pushes humans forward. It's what lets us find cures for polio and it lets us feed the hungry. And so I was like, yeah, that was really good. And then later I realized that it's not actually education, it's religious education. It's education about the Quran. And so, I was kind of let down by that, but, at that point I had pretty much put off any textual-based religion as because there's problems with all of them, and and there are so many that claim to be the inerrant word of God.
Right.
So the problem was just sort of compounding in my brain, and it went from one thing to the next. I studied about Rastafarianism, which is interesting, and made me not like Bob Marley anymore, because I realized that all of Bob Marley's songs, just about, are actually religious in nature.
Oh, that's interesting.
And and I didn't know that, and but I started to see all these problems. I started to see all these really human errors and all these different things that I was looking at. And I started to see how all religions were the same, and I was less seeing their differences. And the things that were always the same about them was how human they were. And there was a guy, I think this was the last time that I went to the Zen Center to do the sitting meditation, and I really wasn't buying into it anyways, but we'd sit there on pillows with our eyes closed, and I would try to calm my mind, which can be a worthwhile activity. But I left deciding I was already enlightened. So maybe that's my own arrogance. But because the abbot of this Zen center said at one point that you realize the more you study is that you supposedly, and this is his interpretation, I'm sure really hardcore Zen Buddhists from China or Japan may disagree with him, but he said that you realize when you become enlightened, and I guess that was him claiming he was enlightened, but you realize when you're enlightened that you were there all along. There was nothing you needed to change. You were as you were. And so I thought, well, then I'm done here. But I'm like, I can accept that. I'm good. I don't need to come here and donate money to you then. What would the point of that be?
Right.
And I agree with some aspects of it. Maybe some people are too in love with their possessions and things like that. I get that, and I think, so I don't think there's no value in it. Just, it's the same in a sense to me as there's a value in coffee and the donuts after the service at the Episcopalian Church. I mean, there is some wisdom to be found, but I think it comes from humans, not the divine. But anyways, the last time I was there, someone said during the discussion that we would have after the meditation, and I had only gone like 3 times, but someone said, I was Christian for a long time, and I was certain that that was the right religion.
Mm-hmm.
And then I fell away from that because I had problems with it. And then I was Jewish for a while, and I was very impressed. This guy hit all the major religions. He said I was Jewish for a while, and then I had problems with that. He's like, and then I was Muslim for a while, and that actually kind of piqued my interest because I've met Jewish people and who were very active in their religion, and I've obviously known a lot of Christians, but I didn't really know that many people who had been Muslim. Mm. And he said, and I was certain for the longest time that Islam was the one true religion. And he said, and now I'm sitting here in the Zen Center, mm-hmm. and he said, and I'm certain that this is it, but I've got a sneaking suspicion now because I've been wrong. I've been sure 3 times before, and this thought in my brain kind of fired off where I was like, oh, what if they're all wrong?
Yeah.
What if you are just going through them, and one at a time you're eliminating them because that's just how it is? Because they can't all be right, but they can all be wrong. And I finally sat down and I started thinking about it. I had this concept of God who was loving, and he wanted us to have good lives, and he didn't want us to suffer. And then it became the problem of evil. Well, why are we suffering then? And I didn't believe in the Bible anymore. And so I had this concept of God that I really had no justification for believing anymore. And, I didn't think that there was this big cabal of scientists who were really working for Satan, who at that Baptist church/school, scientists, it's all a big conspiracy. They're all trying to trick us. And I didn't buy into that because that's ludicrous. Yeah. You could not keep a conspiracy alone. You could not keep a conspiracy on that scale hidden.
Right.
Of course.
Plus, what would be the goal? I mean,
making people go to hell, and that didn't make any sense to me. And I'm like, well, then those scientists have to go to hell. They're really going to go to hell and suffer eternal torment. I mean, there's just so many levels of that conspiracy kind of a thought process didn't make sense to me. I'm like, so I'm at best a science cheerleader, but I understand the concept of evolution. There's just a mountain of evidence for it, and so, kind of in a sideline kind of a way, I'm like, I had reasoned myself to the point of, okay, maybe God sparked the Big Bang, and maybe he even guides evolution, which, whatever. It's a supernatural thing, so we really can't say that it's not happening, but even so, with the way the evidence for evolution is and the way that the theory works, it doesn't need anything like that. It doesn't need intelligent design to work. So I had gotten myself basically back to the place of God sparked the Big Bang. And I knew I had no reason to believe that. I felt like I should at that point. It was the last vestiges, of I had been raised this way to have this thinking.
Didn't you have a lot of trouble getting even to that point because of your fear of hell? Because wasn't that your last true vestige? The fact
a bit.
That hell
I
was
remember
the kind of the thing nipping at your heels.
I remember feeling scared. I remember being in my early 20s, and that was part of the reason I didn't want to think about it, because I was like, man, if I think about it, I'm going to realize I don't believe. And then if I don't believe, and it turns out that it is true, it's sort of this Pascal's wager idea.
Right.
If I don't believe, and then it turns out that it is true, I'm going to have to suffer an eternity of torment in darkness and just on fire, and it will never end. And I was terrified of that. And I had already given up the Bible at this point, but just, you're right, that was just sticking with me, because that, I was 8 years old when people started hitting me with that. Adults that I should have been able to trust were hitting me with this, you are going to suffer and burn forever. And that was actually part of what I couldn't stomach anymore about the Bible, because, I have a grandmother of mine, she converted, she became Jewish, I think when she was in her late 40s. So she wasn't, born Jewish, but she converted. And so I had to wrestle with this idea that when she died, which she's now passed away, she was going to go to hell forever because she didn't accept Jesus.
Right.
because she was Jewish now. She converted. She didn't think that he was God. She didn't ask him to save her, and so, or in the Catholic version, she didn't go to confession and do all these things that you're supposed to do. And I was struggling with this idea that people I knew, people I loved, relatives of mine, who my ancestors way back, might not have believed, and I don't know if they believed or not, but there's a chance that they didn't, and they were suffering, and I couldn't handle that. God was supposed to be good. Why would he do that?
So when you got to this place, as far as believing that God maybe sparked the Big Bang, where was your feelings on hell? Like, had you finally moved beyond that, or was that still like your last?
It had faded, but I found it hard to entirely drop. I had found it hard to entirely drop, probably because it had been drilled into the head of a child, and I was terrified of it. And I was bumming around on the internet, and YouTube, the star of YouTube was rising, and it was becoming a force in the world, a force of nature, possibly even. And I stumbled across, actually what it was, I haven't thought about this in a while, I was actually trying to find evidence that God existed.
YouTube's the wrong place for that.
It is, yeah, definitely now. And then it was starting to be, because this was back even just sort of like the beginnings of YouTube, and so YouTube hadn't quite ramped up to the atheist community that it now has. But I was trying to find evidence that God existed, and the stuff that I found from these people who were amateur, or in some cases professional apologists.
Sorry, can I stop you for a second? We're going to just take a quick break.
Okay.
We apologize for the break. There was a woman vacuuming upstairs, filming in a basement. We're going to have a couple of these kind of issues for right now. Don't worry, it's not my mother's basement. Please continue with your story. I apologize.
So basically, I went to YouTube to try to find, like, what are the arguments for God? Because I knew I was slipping, and I wanted to find that there was some reason other than just like my desire to believe, and the stuff that I found by the amateur and the professional apologists was abysmal. It was the worst stuff. I remember commenting on a video. It's actually by a username. He's I think he's infamous on YouTube. His name is like Venom Fang X or something like that.
Oh my God! Really?
Some teenager sitting in his room trying to give all these proofs for God. I've heard them mention him on other atheist shows and things like that. And his arguments were terrible. And I remember commenting on the videos and being like, man, I believe in God, but this is not the way to argue for it. Like, this there's got to be something better. And by and large, I looked more and more and more, and I didn't find anything better. And the professional apologists were no better, and maybe even in some cases they were a little worse. And while going over that stuff, I found this little like a 3-minute clip. It was Christopher Hitchens giving a closing argument to some kind of debate that he was at, and I had no idea who he was at the time. And he said, to believe in Christianity, this is what you have to believe. And he said,